Welcome, listeners, to the Asset Reliability at Work podcast. As you may know, we cover a bunch of topics centered on asset management and reliability for manufacturing facilities. We share insights directly from the professionals who are in the field, talking with plant leaders, developing asset management plans, and coordinating those next steps for reliability success. In this episode, we'll be speaking with Tim Kister, who is a planning and scheduling subject matter expert at Lifecycle Engineering. Tim's joining the podcast to help us answer some of the more common questions regarding work management for manufacturing facilities. We'll hit on topics such as improving communication with your supervisor, minimizing oversights, and the elements of a thoroughly planned work package, just to name a few. Now let's get the conversation started with Tim Kister in the top 10 most frequently asked questions of work management and planning and scheduling. Now, Tim, in other episodes, I love to start off with giving a little bit of background about yourself so that the listeners and myself know where you've come from and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I've been with Lifecycle Engineering for 16 years. During that time, I've conducted numerous planning and scheduling workshops, worked with clients in implementation of their work management processes, as well as written numerous articles around the subject of work management and planning and scheduling. Before that, I worked in the aluminum industry at a smelter. I was the head of the planning department and worked in the planning department for about 14 years. So I bring that experience with me, also coming off the floor as a mechanic.
Well, thanks for sharing a little bit of your background with us, Tim. And now let's jump right into question number one, and that is, how should I address incidental materials when planning a work order? And what type of assets should be cataloged?
Well, first we need to identify what we're talking about as far as incidental materials. These are usually free issue, point of use type materials such as nuts, bolts, conduit clamps, wire markers, and those kind of things that may not necessarily be a stock item in the stores. They're usually at point of use, but they need to be identified as well in planning that job to minimize the amount of unnecessary travel back and forth between the job site and where those items are located. The main idea is, in any job, is to remember even the small stuff that can reduce the amount of delay that might take place by having to go and find it.
If someone says, my connection with my supervisor isn't very good, how can I improve the way we communicate?
The question that goes with that is, how effective are we communicating between the two of us, the supervisor and the planner? And in many cases, we're not very good at that. Personalities get in the way. A planner and the first line supervisor that they support, they have to become a synchronized team that anticipates each other's needs. To accomplish this, they need to have daily dialogue and establish when these dialogues will take place. It could be early morning and an afternoon, but basically working together as a team rather than just going through the motions and fulfilling some sort of dialogue. So developing a relationship this close requires a commitment on both sides of the table. Once it's in place and the daily routine and the communication is there, the effectiveness will just continue to roll over into good communication with the crew as well.
That's great, Tim. Yeah. So we're highlighting the importance of good communication. Now, here's a good question regarding planning and scheduling and results. So here's the question. My facility implemented planning and scheduling several years ago, but we don't seem to be seeing the results that we anticipated. What could be holding us back? How would you answer that?
Some of the factors that can contribute to this basically come into, where does the planning and the scheduling fit into the organization? A lot of times you have to ask, what are we doing with that person that's filling in that is filling the function of a planner scheduler? One of the first things, are they doing the right things? Is the planner nothing more than a parts expediter or emergency procurement clerk? Once they're assigned as a planner, they need to be given those responsibilities for management. The other part is, as I said, planning is not accepted as part of a core function of maintenance. The other part of maintenance that's core is execution of the work, supervision of the work. And if planning and scheduling has not been accepted as part of that overall role, then they're not going to be effective. The role should be a staff position, compensated very similar to what a day shift supervisor would be. and not looked at as a fill-in that, hey, the supervisor's gone, so we'll use the planner as a supervisor. Or even in some cases I've seen where when work was such that the planners actually put their tools back on and went back out in the field. This is one of the key factors that keep a planning organization from being effective. The other part is the capability of the individual that's filling the planning and scheduling function. They have to have some knowledge of maintenance and be in the thought process about reliability, not just repair. So they got to have the right mindset. They need to be looking at next week and beyond, and not being in today's activities. The third is the actual training of the individual. The planner needs to know how to use their computer system, how the workflow of the work management process flow should go, and even continuing in education in technical skills that would help them support the maintenance crews in the realm that they're supporting, electrical, mechanical, instrumentation, and so forth. So it's very important that the planning function be viewed by the organization as a crucial part of the maintenance team.
Okay, now here's an interesting question regarding minimizing oversights. So you get this. Each week a schedule of maintenance activity is developed and confirmed by the following week. However, it seems that I get hit with, oh, by the way, planned and ready work that has been overlooked or missed. So what can I do to minimize those oversights?
Yes, that does happen routinely, and many times there are circumstances that can't be avoided. A production schedule changed that we didn't anticipate, those kind of things. But a lot of times these are just emotional, oh, by the ways. They're not really validated type, oh, by the ways. In order to address that, basically we should be working in a forecast, 2, 3, best practice 4-week forecast, so that we're looking out into the future so that we can anticipate our preventive maintenance loading, our predetermined work that's coming up, what our labor availabilities would be for that second, third, fourth week that's into the forecast. And then as the forecast week approaches the scheduling time, then we can confirm those, and it's a lot more visible than just looking at, oh, what are we going to do next week? That way we can head off these last-minute delays or interruptions because we've been looking ahead and forecasting. Overall, maintenance and operations should have a full access to this schedule, this rolling forecast, and at the end of the weekly schedule confirmation meeting, everybody is informed because we've had that in our sites.
I particularly like this next question. It's about maximizing productivity during meetings, which I think is pretty much a universal for all, because I know we all are in a lot of meetings. So with that, we have a weekly scheduling meeting to establish our maintenance schedule for the following week. This meeting doesn't seem to be as productive as we feel it should be. How long should this meeting take, and who should attend?
I agree. Meetings tend to get out of hand, and this is one of those that can easily get out of hand if it's not managed properly. And one thing to keep in mind, and this is a weekly scheduling meeting, so the facilitator for this meeting is the scheduler, the person that's filling that scheduling function. With that comes the fact that the meeting needs to have a clear objective. And of course, this being a scheduling meeting, the objective is a confirmed weekly schedule of maintenance for the coming cycle. As we look at this, the idea is it is a scheduling meeting. We have to have an agenda. We have to have clear-cut personnel that are there routinely, consistently, and usually that's the planner, scheduler, the maintenance supervision for the area being scheduled, and maintenance representative. And that maintenance representative is very crucial in this. And as I said in the previous question about the forecast, they're knowledgeable about the forecast, but they also come with the production schedule. They have the ability to grant downtime for equipment, and that they have the support of operational management that says what they negotiate will be followed as this schedule is executed. So basically, when we're talking about this, the effectiveness of this meeting or any meeting, you got to have a facilitator. You have to have the agenda. You have to have the right people. and then set your time frame. It should be no more than an hour. And if everything is anticipated prior to the meeting, then 30 minutes should be sufficient. 45 minutes would be an optimal in that.
So somewhere around that 30 to an hour range.
That's correct.
For a productive meeting.
That's correct.
Okay, great. So now, Tim, you get this question. What is the proper ratio of planner to maintenance technicians? So we have a 20 to 1 ratio, but our planner still seems to be overloaded.
Yes, the current ratio that you state is a best practice ratio. However, there are some things that if they're not in place, that ratio doesn't work. And so there's some things, foundational things that have to be in place. First is there a large amount of reactive or breakdown maintenance taking place? That takes away from capacity of the maintenance team. But also there are some other things in there, and it's our material management system. Is it accurate? Do you have a level of confidence what's in your stores is accurate in the right quantities? Do we have that established or documented within a equipment bill of materials? That takes time for a planner to go into the material system and find what they're looking for within the stores, where a fully integrated bill of materials for their equipment would minimize their amount of time that it would take to find their materials. Another aspect is our equipment history. If the equipment history is very poor within the computer system, then the planner has to spend a lot more time digging out from people's notebooks and little notepads and journals and so forth, rather than it being a part of the equipment history and have a level of confidence that it's reliable information. The other part is on our jobs that are reoccurring, that if we haven't captured those from past activities, then it's going to take time to plan it out, identify tools, material, equipment, and other documentation. And another factor that comes into this ratio effectiveness is our estimating techniques. As the organization matures, then the estimating gets more accurate. We're not looking for pinpoint accuracy, but we're looking for reliable consistency in our estimating, and what's the method that we come up with that. If our equipment history is incomplete, then that affects our ability to estimate. If we do not have predetermined job plans, then we have to revert back to some other estimating techniques as well. And then the last thing that really impacts is planners being assigned to other responsibilities, such as filling in for a supervisor or putting their tools back on or serving on numerous other organizational teams that may come along.
All right. Now, question 7 has to deal with managing backlog. I hear a great deal about knowing how much backlog I have and managing it. Why is it so important, and how much is the right amount?
Yes, backlog is one of those terms that a lot of people don't really understand the whole concept of backlog. It's not about work that is past due. It's about having work to draw from that you can manage your activities better. So it is one of the leading indicators in our performance metrics. It is an index that we use to determine how well maintenance is keeping up with the rate of the work that's being generated. It's also used to help establish good or the proper size and composition of the maintenance workforce, which is very important. You can have too many or you can have too little in your workforce. The backlog is that element that helps the maintenance department understand what is the right level of manning. The other part of the backlog, it helps in working and managing work with operations and in order to make or live up to commitment of when we schedule work. The backlog is what we're going to base that on, and that comes with the estimate of hours that's associated with the work. So it is a tool we use to determine what work would fit into a window of opportunity when we're scheduling, and allows us to take advantage of that work while at the same time minimizing downtime from production and get the most effective and efficient use out of our maintenance resource. So it helps us plan for tomorrow so we can improve reliability and production requirements, and through our scheduling process meet the needs of the customer or operations. So the target to manage the backlog is within a range. And there are two terms that we associate with backlog. One being total backlog, and that's all the work orders that are in our maintenance computer system. And it's important that there are labor hours associated with them. And then there's the other part of it that's ready backlog. That's the portion of the total backlog that is ready to schedule. And all we need is that time from operations that allows the maintenance organization to work on it. So they're very important in knowing how much ready do I have and what portion or how much total backlog that I have as well.
Okay, now this next question actually stays on the same topic of backlog. And it's, you say my backlog should be in weeks to give the best picture of how much I have. How do I go about determining weeks of backlog?
Yes, that's another sticky topic around backlog. We say that we measure backlog in hours, labor hours. So it's important that our labor hours be as realistic and consistent as possible. But at the same time, when we're talking about labor hours, it can be very hard to grasp the magnitude of how much backlog we have. If I said I had 4,800 hours of backlog, how does that relate to me, the supervisor or the maintenance manager? So when we start talking about how much we have, it's easier to understand in weeks of backlog. So the planner is building the labor estimates. The work orders are estimated, and there's where our backlog in labor hours come. So in order to calculate the weeks of backlog, we got to know what our average capacity or our labor capacity is for the organization, whether it's at the crew level or if it's at the departmental level. We need to know how many people we have and basically how many hours are they available in a week. So normally we say our technicians work a 40-hour work week. But if we have breaks in their daily activities of a half an hour every day, so we basically lose 10 hours per person every day of that 40 hours. So if I had a 10-man crew or 10-person crew and their work a 40-hour work week, really I only have the capacity of 375 hours. So if my labor estimates for all my open work orders were 1,880 labor hours, and I had 375 hours available for the week, my total weeks of backlog would be roughly 5 weeks of backlog. That's a lot easier to understand than saying I have 1,880 hours. That's the need to be able to calculate it in weeks of backlog.
Now, getting down to our second to last question before we wrap up this episode, now we're going to talk about level of experience, as in technician experience. So you're approached like this. My maintenance workforce is a mixture of experienced and lesser experienced technicians. What level of experience should I use when planning my work?
This is a question that I get asked numerous times. Almost every planning class that I teach, I get asked this question. And the main goal of planning the work is to reduce delays and interruptions during work execution. And with keeping that in mind, the planner should plan the job for the job, not who potentially would be assigned to execute that particular job or work order. So thorough planning should be built around the scope of the work. And in doing that, experienced technicians would be looking at that work order and the methodology that's laid out in that work order of the scope of the work and so forth. They would be looking at that to refresh their memories, because it may have been 6 months or 6 weeks or 6 years since they saw that similar job, and they would use it as a reference to look for special instructions, torque specs, clearances, wear limits, those kind of things that would refresh their memory so they don't overlook something and induce a failure because they missed something, they forgot something. The lesser experienced technicians lack the experience of working on the equipment, but they may have the skill sets, but they lack the experience. They're going to use that job plan, that work order, to really guide them through how to do that particular job. Now, it's not that the job plan isn't built so basic. It's still relying on a level of technical expertise. But the idea is the more experienced are using it as a reference, the lesser experienced as more of a detailed guide.
That's interesting, Tim, because I never would have thought that the work orders would be looked at in different lights depending on your experience level as a technician. So I'm glad you note that. Now, moving on to our final question before we wrap up the episode, I'm going to ask, what are the elements that contribute to a thoroughly planned work package?
Well, really, in planning a job, there are a lot of things that a planner is going to identify or consider through the aspect of developing the scope of work, materials, and so forth. But basically, there are 5 basic areas that the planner is considering during the course of planning that job. And the first is, we call it the right people. It focuses on the correct skills required to do the scope of the work. The planner would identify how many of those skilled individuals would be needed. And they're also coming up with the estimate of how long is it going to take to complete the work. Now, the estimate that they're looking at is twofold. One, how many labor hours is it going to take to accomplish the work, but also the duration hours of how long it's going to impact the equipment. Operations or production is worried about the duration, and our backlog is considering the number of labor hours. The second factor is the right place, and we're talking here about the asset, the equipment, the location, where it's located, identifying where that activity is very specifically to minimize travel time of the technician going to the work site. In that, it helps reduce, again, the delays that would impact the duration that the equipment is down. So setup time is in there when we're talking about the right place. Where are we going to set up? We might be bringing in a big piece of equipment that needs to be set up. And so in considering the right place, the planner is evaluating where that setup would take place. Another aspect, the third aspect, is the right time. These are windows of opportunity. When we can get access from a maintenance perspective, when operations can release the equipment for maintenance to come in and perform the work. And actually, where's the starting point? Where's the ending point of where this will take place or when it will take place is very important in identifying the time. It might be a particular shift. It might be on a weekend. It might be at the beginning of a shift, and there might be a sequence that needs to take place when we're talking about multiple trades in there. So the right time is very important as the planner is putting this together, and this is a part that would come out during the scheduling aspect. The fourth element I've alluded to a little bit already, and that's determining the right parts, tools, and equipment that are associated with executing this work. So the planner needs to identify the spare parts, whether it is a stock item from the stores, whether it is a non-stock that needs to be direct purchased, whether it's a free issue or one of those items that does not have a part number but is in a bolt bin or a bin nearby. The other part is to make arrangements for any specialty tools that are needed to do that particular job. Now, these would be tools that are not part of the normal technician's toolbox or tool bag. It's what would be above and beyond that. So many times, as an example would be a torque wrench or a multiplier would be needed for a high torque type repair. Then the other part of this is equipment. You may have on-site equipment, welders, man lifts, and so forth, but you may need a portable light generation piece of equipment or a man lift that has more reach than what you have on site. The planner's role is to identify those and make the arrangements to have that on site when that job is scheduled. The fifth element to this is just information. It consists of specifications, permits, hazards of the job, safety instructions, safety data sheets, if there's chemicals involved, the work instructions, appropriate documentation, engineering drawings, P&IDs. These are things that complete that work package, that when that technician gets assigned, whether they're the older experienced or the lesser experienced, they have all the information necessary to do that particular job with minimal delays, minimal interruptions, and have a chance of getting it done in the amount of time that's been negotiated with the operation.
Tim, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedule to help us thoroughly answer the top 10 most frequently asked questions of work management and planning and scheduling. Now, listeners, I have added 2 links into our show notes that I want to quickly tell you about. The first is for the digital version of what we discussed in this podcast, which goes into a little bit more detail. And the second link is for your professional education. The Lifecycle Institute, which is the education entity of Lifecycle Engineering, is now accepting registrations for the 5-day maintenance planning and scheduling class. This class teaches proven processes that are fundamental to effective planning and scheduling and successful CMMS, EAMS deployment. Again, visit the show notes for more information on how to access this information. Be sure to check out our other podcasts on our website at www.lce.com. And thanks again for tuning in to the Asset Reliability at Work podcast. Hey listeners, one more thing before you go. If you have any feedback for the show, or you have maybe some suggestions for upcoming topics you'd love to hear about, we'd like to hear from you. So there's 2 ways to get in contact with us. The first is on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @LCE_today, so be sure to follow us. And then the other way is to email the show at podcast@lce.com. Once again, thank you for joining the show, and we look forward to more episodes on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast.